Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. I am your host, Lou Perez, and today I am joined by Patrick Dorinson. You might recognize him from his appearances on Newsmax. He's also the host of the Cowboy Libertarian, and something I'm very excited about, he has a book coming out called The Common Sense Cowboy's Guide to Life, Stories from the Old Guy at the End of the Bar. So, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet, Lou. Pleasure.
Thank you. The first question that I have, I want to ask you about your hat that you're wearing, your cowboy hat.
Yeah.
How long have you had that hat? Do you have like a multitude of hats, or is there like one special one that lives on your head, basically?
Well, this hat is my newest. I've got about 3 winter hats and, well, actually 4 winter hats, and then I've got about 5 summer hats. So summer hats are straw, and these are beaver.
Oh, wow.
Felt beaver. And I got this one last summer when I was up in Billings, Montana. There's a store called Rand's, and I've become kind of a regular customer. And I really like Rand's hats. They're real soft. And the hat I used to wear many years ago, it kind of had to get retired because it just was starting to fall apart. But the great thing was it was dirty and dusty, and I earned every piece of dirt and dust. So, and I got another one like that as well. So you kind of move around and have different ones.
Yeah. I asked that because years and years ago I spent like a week. Was it a week? Yeah, about a week in Archer City, Texas, which is like a small town right next to Oklahoma. And I was there for like a writer's retreat. And the town had a lot of, cowboys that were there. And I guess when it comes to cowboys and cowboy attire, it is geographically specific as far as like size of hats and that sort of thing. And what I learned, yeah. So what I learned in Archer City, these guys had some big hats. They could have been hiding all sorts of stuff under these big hats. And I learned that the hat that they're wearing is it was almost like a relationship. And to ask a man, if you were a woman, "Oh, can I wear your hat?" Which you
Ooh.
would think would be like a cute thing to do, like in a bar, it's a no-no. Yeah. So one of my friends, one of my classmates had made, the faux pas of asking a man if she could try on his hat. And he let her do it. And I think it was, I don't know if it was the talk of the town, but it might have been the talk of the night at that bar. And, I worry if we had stayed there a little longer, maybe, punches would have been thrown or something like that.
Well, that's one of the big rules. Never, 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 never touch another man's hat, ever.
Mhm.
And you also have to know other proper etiquette, like where you wear a hat. When you come indoors, you're not wearing a hat. Now, there's a couple different rules. If you go to a diner and you have your hat on, if you go sit at the counter, you can keep it on.
Hmm.
If you sit at a table, you should take it off. Those are kind of some unwritten rules that everybody should go by. It's also how you set your hat down. You never set your hat down on a table like this. You set it down with the crown down.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Because if you set it down this way, over time, it's going to get flattened out and you're going to lose the shape of your brim.
Hmm.
So you put it this way. And, but yeah, and you also got to remember when you're at the diner, just because the waitress calls you hun doesn't mean she's flirting with you. It just means she's being friendly.
There you go. There's some of that, some wisdom from that at the end of the bar. I'm sure you've had to say that a bunch. So with when you watch like depictions of cowboys in movies or TV, how often do they get it right? Because I'm imagining that more than often they get it wrong.
Well, I think, if you watch Yellowstone, for example, they usually get it right when they're doing all the cowboy work and stuff. Taylor Sheridan owns the Four Sixes Ranch down in Texas. It's one of the largest ranches in the United States, and he gets it right. How he depicts them. For me, it's like that, but there's also, he's got the bigger story, which is kind of like a Western soap opera. And in a way, if you look at Yellowstone, go back and look at the TV shows like the Big Valley Bonanza way back in the 60s. And what he's done is he's just brought it up to the 21st century, really. It's still about a family and all the different things that go on within the family and all the outside influences and all the bad guys they got to go against. So, in that sense, it's pretty good. I think if you look at some of the Westerns of the past, the way guys are spinning guns around,
Mhm.
try and spin a Colt around your finger. And also how the quick draw and stuff and how they actually hit something. Probably the best depiction of a gunfight was in Tombstone because, you know, the idea that you're gonna, pull out a pistol at, 30, 40 yards and hit somebody exactly where you want to, you got to be pretty good and pretty steady. So I think some of those depictions are different. But it depends on whether you're watching the gunfighter cowboy movie or you're watching something that's about a cattle drive, like John Wayne in Red River. Um, there's a lot more authenticity in some of those things. But for me, it's like as long as they keep depicting cowboys, I think it's good for the cowboy world, for the Western world. And I didn't grow up as a cowboy. I mean, I'm a kid from the suburbs. My mother grew up as a cowgirl, so for me, it kind of came through the DNA. And then as my life changed over time, and I finally decided to chuck all the, you know, how shall I say, the accoutrements of a normal life, and kind of went down the cowboy path. It's been quite a journey. So I like the way sometimes they do it, but sometimes it's a little bit much.
Yeah. One of the things about cowboys is that I mean, it's synonymous with America. Like, there's no way to think about the Cowboys without thinking about the United States. And something that I found interesting was just how popular cowboy stories were for people in Europe reading about it. So, like,
Yeah,
you take someone like James Joyce, uh, uh, just an incredible figure when it comes to literature, especially literature in the English language. As a boy, he was reading cowboy stories, and
sure.
he loved it. And it was uh, so I find it so interesting when you look at the United States has produced so much culturally, uh, and that's one of the things that has made it well beyond our borders.
Yeah, one time I was in Germany. It was 1976, and I got on a train, and at the next stop, there must have been 30 or 40 Germans dressed up as cowboys. I think the German author's name is Karl May, and he wrote a lot of Westerns stories, and the Germans just ate it up. And it's so funny. Here are these people dressed up, and they were dressed more like, Hollywood cowboys.
Right.
But nonetheless, they were having a great time. The gals were wearing, the big dresses and everything else and feathers in their hair, and the guys had 6 shooters on either hip. And then when they open their mouth and they go, "Bist Außenseiter, yeah, 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 cowboy." It was kinda cool, but, I was going, "Where am I?" And the
Yeah.
guy said, "Oh, there's a big," he tells me, "There's a big, meeting. We come and we get together and we all cowboy." I said, "Well, you got any horses?" And he goes, "Oh, no, we don't have any horses."
Oh man. Yeah, that reminds me of, that recently in my neck of the woods up in New Jersey, there's a Renaissance fair,
Mm,
and just
yeah.
e and it's funny to see, like, all these kind of, like, subcultures, for one, just how many people are into things that you wouldn't know they're into because you're not a part of it, and they go all out for it, whether it's like,
Yeah.
how they're dressing, they're talking. There are a few people, it's like, hey, you don't have to lean too far into that character.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, I think everybody goes to Renaissance fair so they can grab a turkey leg and scarf on a turkey leg.
Yeah,
And they get to go thee and thou and ye and yo and all that other kind of stuff. But, there's also Civil War reenactors. I mean, that's a big, big thing.
yeah.
And if you ever been to a real good Civil War reenactment, it's awesome. It really is nice. I went one time out in Brandy Station, Virginia, which is the site of one of the biggest cavalry battles in the history of the Civil War. And all of a sudden I hear this rumbling, and we're in this spectator area. Boom, over the hill come these guys dressed as Confederate cavalry, and they're whooping and hollering. They got their sabers out and coming the other direction as the Union cavalry. It was impressive. And you're right. Those people get into that stuff. And there are a lot of subcultures in America, but that's kind of what makes this country so great. We've got all these different
Yeah.
subcultures in there. I just wish we would keep the subcultures, keep all that stuff. But when it comes to certain things, we're all Americans. So let's kind of try and remember that and not try and keep dividing ourselves into identity groups. I think that's one of the things that really has hurt us over the last many years. And, Theodore Roosevelt even said, if you're going to be an American, right? Learn English and start adopting our customs and our holidays. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of your past and not be proud of where you're from or be proud of your heritage. But, we're all supposed to be in this thing together.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I found, recently there was the No Kings protests that were happening all over the place, and I think no matter which side of the aisle you're on, I think one thing that made me happy, and I didn't go to the protests. I thought it was kind of silly, but what I liked seeing was I was like, wow, I'm finally seeing some American flags. I'm finally seeing people who 5 years ago we're talking about, the United States being built on a system of white supremacy and the 1619 Project and all that. And I'm like, dude, yeah, one guy dressed like Thomas Paine, you get, waving the flags. And I'm like, you know what? Well, I think that's good for the optics. I think that looks good,
But you know something, Lou, I got to tell you,
Mm.
I looked at some of those pictures and what did I see? I mean, I'm a baby boomer.
Mm.
I saw a bunch of my generationalists, if you will, out there. And yes, they're looking at this is their last hurrah.
Mm. Yeah.
And they're looking at it as because they understand, even the most, left wing of them, that it doesn't do them any good to wave, Mexican flags or Palestinian flags. But it also is a problem because the Democratic Party is right now a collection of groups and is not bound together by one single thing. Franklin Roosevelt, when he had the coalition, he had, urban Jewish voters, urban ethnic voters, and he also had deep South Democrats, right? Neither of whom probably liked each other, but he won big majorities. And right now, what I see with the Democrats is you've got the older baby boomers who are realizing they better start waving American flags once again. And you've got the younger radicals out there who, they're saying your days are over.
Mm.
Chuck Schumer's a perfect example. Chuck Schumer's a baby boomer. He's my age. And when I see him out there among the people trying to go power to the people and everything, it's kind of sad and it's also kind of laughable. And that's the schism that they're going through right now. And it's not getting any better and it's not healing. And the younger ones are saying, you guys have been running things for a long time. Nancy Pelosi's 80. Steny Hoyer is in his 80s. Look at all the Democratic leadership. They're way up there in age. And the young ones are kind of getting, when's it our turn? And they have a totally different view of things. Now, I like to look at it as it's like what happened when I was growing up and stuff, and when I was a young man in college. The one things that the left-wing Democrats at that point, we're going to get the Vietnam War. Well, we ended the Vietnam War, and then we took down Nixon with Watergate, right? And they started to feel their oats. And what else happened? They went and took over the institutions of America. They started being college professors. They became government workers, and they infiltrated, if you will, the government from the left. Hollywood, all the different institutions of America that we call woke nowadays, all started back with the baby boomers during the Vietnam era, and it's moved progressively through. Now, getting a hold of the education system, what did they do? They started creating a lot of little Frankensteins. A lot of little people who, they were gonna somehow mold a generation in their image. It's a little bit arrogant, just like Frankenstein thought he was going to create a human being out of body parts. And so what has happened now, just like with Frankenstein, where, Dr. Frankenstein put the wrong brain into the monster and it started rampaging through the village and killing people. Well, What they did is they put the wrong thoughts, if you will, into the brains of the young people. And now the Frankensteins they're created, they're running rampant in the village. And guess who's going to be the biggest victims? Not conservatives. The biggest victims of it is going to be those Frankenstein doctors and baby boomers and people like Chuck Schumer who put that stuff in those young folks' head, and now they can't control
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible too. I mean, the word boomer has become a slur.
it. Yeah,
It's thrown around. Now, you don't even have to be a boomer to be called a boomer,
yeah.
to be put down. And yeah, well, and one of the things about the states, I think that's happened over the years, and this has been for a while. I mean, I think I've felt it for at least the past 10 years. Is so much of of local news and happenings become national. So much of like local cultural events become national to a point where there are some times where I would see a headline and I'm like, why do I care what's going
Yeah.
on in San Francisco? Like, why? Like, I don't even know the half of the stuff that's happening in my own backyard. But culturally speaking, I need to look at look at what's happening in San Francisco. And for me, something that's closer. I'm from New York originally, and just watching like the mayoral race happening here, where look, not a fan of Cuomo. I came after him, during the pandemic in particular for
Hmm.
the way that he handled things. But it is a little wild when it's like, uh, we have Cuomo up against a a young man who is outright a socialist, and damn, open about it. And you have all of the, at least in New York, I'm seeing all the regular party apparatchiks uh, getting behind him, and it's like, Democrats, if I think that the guy is going to win the mayoral race. You are now defining the Democratic Party as, oh yeah, we're the communists, we're the socialist communist light, if anything. And man, I don't know what the future looks like, if that's the case, if they have to go all in and say, yeah, this is our guy.
Well, you know something? I'm telling you, Lou, neither do they. They don't know what the outcome is.
Right.
They again, whether it's Kathy Hochul in New York, whether it's Pritzker, whatever, listen to what they're doing. They look at Donald Trump's success, and just like, the National Football League, they say is a copycat league. If one team is successful with a certain offensive scheme, everybody tries to adopt it, right? The only difference is the team that was successful, not everybody has a Patrick Mahomes, so you're not going to
Right.
be as successful as the Kansas City Chiefs. You can adopt the same plays. If you don't have the same players, it doesn't mean anything. And I think that's what's happening in politics. The Democrats now, they think by getting tough, by yelling, by using, foul language, that somehow they're going to replicate Donald Trump, because they totally misunderstand what Donald Trump's success comes from. And they totally misunderstand the country. I mean, Donald Trump, and I've said this for a long time, Donald Trump is not a guy from Manhattan. And, being a New Yorker and you're an East Coast guy, he's from Queens. He
He's from
talks like a
Queens.
guy from Queens, right?
Yeah.
He has to have the last word. He knows how to give you a good shot, right? And also, he kind of has a little wry smile when he does it sometimes. The American people don't wanna think you're tough because you swear, or you use, I'm gonna go fight this guy and I'm gonna knock him down and all. Hey, people don't wanna hear that. They know you're a phony. The reason why Donald Trump's successful because he's authentic. That's who he is.
Yeah.
He's no different today than he was way back when. The only difference way back when there, he was might have been a little softer, but he understands the culture out there, and he latched onto it at a time when the little guy in this country had finally had enough. And I always say, if you go back to Nixon's silent majority, Reagan had the Reagan Democrats. Then later on, we had the Tea Party. All those movements culminated in Donald Trump because all those people kept looking at both sides like this. And, they said to themselves, and there's a great saying by the libertarian James Bovard, who said, politics should be more than two wolves sitting down with a sheep to discuss what to have for dinner.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the people have felt all these years. I'm sitting there. You want me to? Which guy do I vote for? Well, again, another famous guy said, who you gonna vote for? Well, I'm gonna vote for the guy who's gonna take me to hell the slowest. So all of that indicates to me that the Democrats don't understand the country. Donald Trump understood the country, and that's where this country is. It's finally coming back to its equilibrium and getting away from the woke stuff and saying to itself, God dang it, we're Americans. And the very fact that the older folks at the No Kings rally were waving American flags. You're right. I saw a guy dressed like Uncle Sam. Great. Welcome back. But for your party, it might be a little too late because those young people aren't going to wait around another election cycle so that you kind of drift away. And I think, Chuck Schumer is scared to death. I think all of these guys are scared to death. And they've allowed their party to be taken over by the very people that they created.
Yeah. And also, I mean, over the years, I mean, there's only so far you can go with demonizing a particular set of voters, which are straight white guys, you
Yeah.
know. And I think for a while, like straight white guys are like, all right, whatever, I could take it. But after a while, you keep hitting them and hitting them and hitting them. After a while, it they're going to say, okay, this party is not for me. So I'm going to go with anybody else who's not going to treat me like I'm garbage. And what I find funny when it comes to like the authenticity versus inauthenticity, and I live a lot of my life online on X and that sort of thing, and watching someone like say like a Gavin Newsom, governor of California,
Yeah.
try to replicate the memes and the language and the way that Trump's team runs his social media comes off as so inauthentic,
Yeah.
so fake, and also it's like this guy Newsom is acting like he's going to be running against Trump in 3
Right.
years, and it's like, no, Trump's gone in 3 in 3 years. You're going to be running against probably JD Vance, so you're gonna have to change you're gonna have to change things up on how you're gonna go up against another, I think, formidable opponent when it comes to politics.
Yeah. And Gavin Newsom is carrying around the biggest albatross you can. It's called California.
It's called California, yeah. Right.
And he's I mean, I'm a native Californian. And when I was growing up, and here I go again with that when I was growing up stuff. But, in my book, I talk about, um, you know, I don't want to be that, here we go again. I don't want to be the guy that says, get off my lawn, because actually I love some of the things that young people are doing. But when you look at a guy like Newsom, when I was going to school, we had the best roads. California was so golden because it had weathered the Great Depression. Both my folks, came to California in the 1930s. My mom was 18 and my dad came when he was 15 and a half. And they were poor as church mice. And they carved their life out of California. And California was the only place really where there was still prosperity. All you got to do is read The Grapes of Wrath and realize that why people were coming to California. They were wiped out in the Dust Bowl and they came to California. They had grit. They had the ability to work. They wanted to work. And, the whole Central Valley of California was expanded and built agriculturally by those very people. And they're still relatives of the old Okies living there. And it's the same, World War II. California had all this land. We were on the Pacific Ocean. So ships were being built, planes were being built. California was so prosperous. We had a great education system post-war. Everybody envied California. Well, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Sunset Boulevard. Have you ever seen it?
It's one of the classics that I haven't
Yeah.
seen. I gotta
Well,
say.
it's basically about a fading actress who still thinks she's something, and she hires this young writer to write her a movie. She's a silent film star in the age of talkies. Well, what happens is she still thinks she's the best. California is like that actress. They still think they are what they were in the past, and they're still riding on past glories. They're not riding on the future anymore. Even the high-tech companies that were born there are leaving. Young people are leaving. And, what are you left with? You're left with very rich people and, quite frankly, a lot of poor people and working people. So California is going to be something that Gavin Newsom is going to have to try and carry. And I've always said, if everybody thinks these political experts out there, I mean, the one good thing, and as a side note that's happened, is Donald Trump has crushed the expert class. So that's kind of a side benefit. But all these experts talk about Gavin Newsom nominee and look what he's doing here, and he's making this move over here, doing all this stuff. Look, do they think that some guy who's got from a state in the Midwest is going to let Gavin Newsom walk away with the nomination without a fight?
Right.
I mean, that ain't going to happen. And they're going to all have to carry the burden of the party, like I said a minute ago, that they have created. And they can't, it's not this old fashioned way of, well, we'll kind of go to the left during the primaries and then we'll go to the center during the general. That doesn't work anymore in the age of things like podcasts like you do and all the other stuff on the internet. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Um, California is a state that is, I can't explain to people. Just if you haven't been to California, it is such a beautiful state where just drive if you go to LA and drive an hour north or an hour south, or go all the way north to the to the top regions of the state. There's so many just different beautiful climates that you can be in,
Right.
and a lot of people have pointed out where it's like, what has saved California so much from people just getting out of there is the weather. Is just this
Yeah.
perfect, God, the way God intended it to be. I lived in Los Angeles for a few years, and I think something that, especially if you live in LA, you forget about the rugged roots of California. You
Exactly.
forget about like you were talking about your parents when they got there in the 30s, and also all the men and women who had to come out there and forge this new world out in California. And I've been reading a little bit of Joan Didion, and she has a book, a collection of
Right.
essays called The White Album. And it's so wild because she's writing about California like in her time there in the 60s and 70s, and yet it still resonates with me, even though I was there in 2010, 2012. And she has this one chapter about water and what has to the things that need to happen on a technical level for them to get water in
Yeah.
California. And she has the type of mind. She's very obsessive and she has all these details and stuff. And it was something like when I was there, I didn't even think of, I'm in a desert.
Yeah.
There's no reason why water should be running at all. And when there's a drought, when they're asking us, don't take too long of a shower, totally taking it for granted. Like, this shouldn't be we shouldn't have water at all, let alone enough to bathe ourselves. So, it's like, thanks to the people who were able to forge it and actually make it happen.
Well, it's a funny thing. There's a saying in the West, and particularly in California, but all up throughout the West, that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting.
Mm,
The West is a story of the fight for water, and whether it was cattlemen versus sheep herders, whether it was cities versus rural areas, and that's throughout the whole West because we don't, we have rivers and lakes and things like that, but you're drawing on it's a huge area, and there's just not enough water to go around. In California, depends on, I like to say it depends on the Colorado River and Mother Nature for its water. And when I say Mother Nature, I mean rainfall, and we catch it in reservoirs. I mean, literally, that's what it was. The river systems of the West, they flow all over the place, but we don't have a lot of places we can draw, the sustenance and the water we need. Look how many states draw off the Colorado River. Las Vegas draws off it. Colorado draws off it. Every state in that Intermountain West, they're pulling water out of the Colorado. Well, eventually, everybody's allotment's going to get cut back, and Los Angeles in particular. And you mentioned desert. You look at a picture of Los Angeles in 1920, even. And it's a desert. You dig down some of that concrete, and all that asphalt, it's a desert. And somebody figured a way to bring the water over the mountain, and do that. And the whole movie Chinatown
right.
with Jack Nicholson was about water. bringing water to Los Angeles, and the corruption was going back and forth, and that's just the way things were. So, the West has always been blessed and also cursed, and it's blessed with all the natural resources that we have, but also cursed in the fact that the one resource that we need is in short supply. And there's another old saying, when there's a drought, everybody's dry. When it rains, everybody gets wet. Mother Nature makes no distinction. So it's a great story. The story of the West is a great story.
Yeah. And just for everybody, just to remind you, Patrick Dorinson's book that you can pre-order right now. It's The Common Sense Cowboy's Guide to Life: Stories from the Old Guy at the End of the Bar. And a Californian who I really enjoy reading. He's a historian, Victor Davis Hanson, who writes quite a bit
Yes.
California. I don't know if he's from the Salinas Valley, but he writes quite a bit about the farming regions of California.
Yeah, he's from the Central Valley. Yes, he is.
And all the stuff,
Yeah.
all the government regulations they come up against, especially when it comes to who gets the water and who doesn't.
Right. Right.
Yeah. With something I wanted to ask you. I was thinking about this, especially with the subtitle, stories from the old guy at the end of the bar. I feel like we sort of live in a time where older people are kind of pushed aside in that it's like, you're old, get it, get out of here. And I may have felt that way when I was like a teenager, but as I've gotten old, I'm 43 and I have kids. I realize, oh, there's so much I don't know. And I bet a guy who's been through it can give me some wisdom. I can get something from there. But do you find yourself kind of expected to be to be a sage? Do you find like, oh, they're coming to me because they think I must know something?
In a way, the whole premise of the book is, you know, when I used to hang out in saloons when I was a younger man, there was always an old guy at the end of a bar, and maybe one at each end. And for my demonstration, it's like the old guy at the end of the bar, who's the cantankerous one. He's hollering at the TV. Nobody pays much attention to him because he's kind of not very nice, and he's one of those "when I was your age" and "get off my lawn" and all that stuff. But there was always another guy at the other end of the bar, maybe, and he was quiet. He kind of had his drink, and if you walked up to him as a young person, and I knew people like this, he would give you some sage advice. And it wasn't that he's saying, "Here's 10 things you need to do to become a better person," or "do it the way I did it." It's more like, and this is again the premise of the book. It's, let me tell you a story about what happened to me. And you got a good question there, young man. And kind of give them what happened to you, and maybe, don't necessarily do it my way, but, take the wisdom that I've learned after all these years and try and use it. One of the things that I like to do is I have gotten to the point where I love young people. And there's, we as you mentioned a minute ago, Lou, about how, the news, we focus on these things on the news about, this demonstration here, as if, everybody should worry about it. Where I live and places I've lived in, ranch areas and cowboy country and all over, you know, people aren't sitting around worrying about what's happening. They don't get up every morning and turn on the news. They don't get up every morning and start panting because of some demonstration that happened. One, they got work to go to. And two, they have other things to do in their life. They got kids to raise, as you do. Life is not all worked up in this tight world. And I firmly believe that what we have to do is get a little intergenerational dialogue going on. I always said the young people got the legs and the stamina, and we got the wisdom. So maybe if we kind of get together a little bit and start talking to each other instead of at each other, we could have a lot more better conversations. And that's one of the things that I wanna try and do is, um, kinda also give young people, especially young men, for somebody to talk to.
Mhm.
Somebody who, a lot of them don't have fathers, or the father's not at home, or maybe they need an uncle, or they don't have a big brother or whatever. Somebody that they can kinda, you know, ask a question of, and get a decent answer, and along the way, have a little fun, laugh a little, realize that life is so much bigger than bouncing from screen to screen, from day to day, looking at stuff instead of, look what God gave you, kid, and enjoy it, work hard, and you know something? If you do it right, things are gonna turn out okay, and I just wanna make sure that young people feel that, and because I always tell folks, especially folks in my generation, you can go sit in the 55 and older community, you earned your retirement, that's good, but don't give up on the kids that are gonna be coming up after you, because they need our support. And while right now sometimes it's nice to think, when you're young, you go, I'll do that later. I'll do that later. Well, I always tell them, life isn't a dress rehearsal. This is it. And so get everything you can out of life right now, and talk to a couple of older folks, and if we older folks can kind of, you know, help them a little bit, part of each generation's job is to leave the country a little better than we found it. And I think we as boomers and other generations have to say, okay, we did some good things, we did some bad things. Maybe we should try and correct some of
Mm. Yeah, when you put it like that, yeah, I do wonder, how many, people are sort of like, older people are kinda actively kinda taking themselves out of the conversation, I guess,
it.
by
Right.
sort of going to the retirement communities and just, sticking to the things that they do as opposed to, like, uh, a buddy of mine in England, during COVID, he was, kinda sounding the alarm about, local, pub culture in England and with the lockdowns and stuff, and pointing out, there are, older men, retirees, where their whole, kind of social circle, their day would be,
Yeah.
going to the pub, during the day. And, when you say that to somebody, you're like, "Oh, they're a bunch of alcoholics." It's like, no, no, they're guys who go there and socialize and, even if they're reading the paper and there's people that they see every day. And then during that, you know, that moment in time, that was taken away from them. And
Yeah.
nobody asked, where do those guys go? Where was, where do they spend the rest of their days, and with whom? Where, um, I think there is something to be said about, going to a bar, a type of bar that is open to all sorts of generations. Like you have the bars where there's gonna be a DJ and it's gonna be too loud and you're not gonna have a conversation. Okay, we know you're younger, you wanna go there and hook up and all that. Then there's other bars, where you go and it's like, oh, maybe there's some music, it's a little, it's turned down a little bit. There might be a TV screen with a game playing, preferably not, but there's some actual communication that could happen there.
If you look, and again, going back to my own personal experience in San Francisco. San Francisco, I was fortunate enough to be there in the 70s and the early 80s, when just before San Francisco, I would say, turned and became it used to be just a big small town,
Mm,
and there were neighborhoods all over the place, and there's neighborhood bars. You just described kind of what the old neighborhood bar was, because people lived in apartments, you
mm,
know, they weren't that big. And so where was the socializing place? Usually it was at some local bar, and there was dang near one on every corner. And what you would go in, and it's the old, everybody knows your name kind of thing of
right,
cheers. But it was also, there was a television, because remember back when television first came out, it was more popular in the 50s and stuff. People went, not everybody just went, there ain't no Costco. You're going to go buy a big flat
right,
screen
right,
TV. So where do you go to watch TV? It was a gathering place. If there was a presidential debate, you went to the bar maybe. But you're right, it was a social place, and more like an English pub. And that's where I always got, I'd seek out those old guys, not the nasty ones, but,
Right.
it taught me so much because, I grew up in suburbs, and suburbs aren't the same place, and I spent a lot of my early adult years after college and stuff working in the city and stuff, and, I hung out in places like that. You meet different people, and you meet the people that kinda make things work in America, working people for the most part, and I think that's something that we kind of forget. We keep thinking when we're watching the news or what gets the attention in this world is that really don't mean a hill of beans. Instead of, I like to say, I like to go to a feed store or if I'm on the road, I like to go to a truck stop early in the morning. And it's amazing what you see. One of the most beautiful sights in the world to me is watching America go to work at daybreak. You go to a place and you'll see at the feed store, you'll see guys loading up. Or you go to a gas station with 12 pumps and everybody's going there. And if it's a hot summer day, the foreman for the crew's getting a bunch of ice. He's getting bottled water for his guys, and he's got pipes and shovels coming out the back. And maybe he's a landscaper. And then you got a guy over here, he's got his truck and he's got paint. And the guy over there, he's an electrician. And, there's the trucker sitting there and he's, taking his break. It's watching America on a daily basis. That is the most beautiful thing in the world. It really is. Because I don't know these people. And you start to joke with them and stuff, and well, just this morning, I was out early and I went, got a cup of coffee and just kind of watch the guys and you chat with them a little bit. You learn your country. You learn that thing that we all look on TV about, oh God, look at these protesters, or look what these expert in Washington says. He don't know sheep shit from Arbuckle's coffee, as my mother used to say, right? But you go talk to the guy who knows how to do something. That to me is much more enlightening than all that other nonsense. And
Mm.
also, that happens every day, no matter who's president, no matter who's controlling Congress, no matter what movie came out. Somebody's got to do the regular stuff every day of the week. And there's single moms who are holding down 3 jobs. There's that working person. The band Alabama has a song, 40 hours a week. And it's an homage to the people doing all the regular stuff in this country. And I wish we pay a little more attention to that and a little less attention to some young person with purple hair running around screaming because she's a toddler and she didn't get what she wanted.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about, you know, the people that you describe, going about their workday or starting their workday, how invisible they are to so many people. And when I think about it, I think about just kind of how lucky I was, not only to be, born in America, but to also to be born to lived in Queens, and also the type of industry that my dad was in. My dad's a butcher, so it's great, talk with,
Good.
about cowboy stuff. And, what was
Well,
normal.
he got the cow after I chased it.
Oh, yeah, 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 even yeah, yeah, and after the slaughterhouse too, so
Yeah,
there's
right.
a few steps before we
Yeah,
got our hands dirty. Um, but, for me, what was just normal is so abnormal to other people in New York. Like, how many people in New York even, go now to a local butcher, as opposed
right.
to just ordering it and coming there. So there are things like, my dad used to have a van that he used to use for, deliveries and picking up from the market. And there is such an awful smell in that van come summertime, right? Just the
Yeah,
smell of
imagine.
that meat. And I can't explain it to people how it's such a terrible smell, but yet if I'm ever passing, like, say, like, the meatpacking district in Manhattan, and I get that, I'm transported, to my youth and something like there's something that it's bad, it's a bad smell, but yet it's so comforting too. And I'm fortunate in that I know a butcher. I know what the life of the butchers that were there. I'm fortunate that I know cops and I know firemen and I know guys in construction, and I just having having my world being a lot bigger than just me by just knowing people who live completely different lives.
Well, I got to tell you, in the last, you know, when I kind of began my cowboy journey, um, I've had the opportunity to ride and, I mean, I've got a beautiful horse and, um, I've had wonderful people show me that not just better skills on how to ride, but also how to work cattle and also the cowboy way. And my mom taught me a lot of that too. So I kind of had a little bit of a head start. But another section of America that people forget, and they're called rural people, are cowboys and farmers and those folks. And you know, you go to work on I've gathered cattle up in Idaho, right? Basically, what happens is the cows are up in summer range, and you bring them down for winter because it's going to be harsher weather up there, and you want to keep a better eye on them. And so you gather them up. And the first time I ever gathered cows, I was with a 12-year-old boy. And, you know, we got on the horses, and what happens is the boss tells you, all right, Patrick, you go with Ty, and Lou, you go over there with Larry, and Bill, you go with Mary because they're men and women. And you're going out, riding and gathering up the cows. Well, I'm with this young boy, and it was my first time doing it. And I looked at him and I said, Ty, I want you to know something. He said, yes, sir. I said, if I mess up today, you got my permission to give me a good swift kick in the ass. He looked at me and he goes, uh-huh. We rode most of that day, and then we split up later and rode with other people doing other things. And as we came back, it was just dusk, and I sat on the porch of this cabin, a very big cabin, and I was just looking out at the sun going down, and it was just absolutely gorgeous, and the cows that we'd brought in were below us. You could hear them. And he kinda walks past me, and he nods at me, and he walks in the house after he took off his boots, because if he wore his boots in the house, his mother would have killed him. He walks in the house, then he backs up and looks down at me, and he says, "You done good today." That was one of the happiest moments of my entire life. That 12-year-old boy saying that to me. And then when I go inside, as dinner's getting ready and everything, he's with the other young boys being a kid.
Mm,
When he's out there, he's a man. He's expected to do a man's work. And when you meet more and more farm people and ranch people and their kids, a kid is another set of hands once they're old enough. Um, there's a kid right now I know that I remember the first time I ever saw him, his mother had him in her saddle, sitting him right here. Now he's a champion roper, and he's gotten so dang tall, but it's this, it gives me that kind. I like all that because one, it gives me the continuum of America. It's part of American history. It's part of the American way. It's part of the American culture. But it's also something that I think that we've got to instill more in people that aren't farm and ranch kids. We've got to get them more to understanding that the food don't come from a grocery store, and understanding that hard work is hard work, and you don't get praise every time just because, you showed up, that old participation trophy. And again, that's something that, I see more and more. I see this Gen Z, or I don't even know which one we're on yet. You know, LMST or whatever. Lucky
yeah.
Strike means fine tobacco. But it's like everybody has got to understand that we've got to invest in the young people, but we old people also got to not just quit and not just go sit on our hind ends and say, we've done our job and now we're just going to go relax for the rest of our lives. Because I'll tell you, the more you engage somebody who's younger, the more you're going to stay younger, at least in your mind, because the body kind of gives you away after time.
Yeah. And I'll, and I'll say, I mean, for you to take up, the cowboy, lifestyle, as a, as a new thing to do, is pretty amazing. And we have our mutual friend Matthew Klickstein, with whom
Yeah.
uh, you wrote your book. He shared with me some footage of you riding a horse with your arms,
Oh,
like
yeah.
riding a horse like without using his arms. And maybe it's the dad in me. I was like, oh no, Patrick, don't, like, oh no, Patrick, please hold it. Please take the reins or something like that. But it is cool to see that, and also to hear stories like the one you just told about that 12-year-old. So
Well, you know something, I got to tell you, that ride that Matthew showed, we call it a passenger ride. Now, you couldn't see what I was doing with my legs.
mm,
I was using my legs to move the horse. And first of all, that's my horse, and he and I are tight as ticks, so we know each other pretty well. And he knows if I turn my body, he knows to turn. Now, I also use my legs. I might open my left leg and push with my right. And when I stop, I just sit a little deep, and he stops. So, but again, that's based on trust between the horse and myself, and confidence, and his confidence in me, because horses, like kids, need a leader. You have to be the leader. You have to be the one to say, we're going to do it this way. And you also have to be the one to say, you don't be scared, because, a horse is a prey animal.
mm,
They get, when a mountain lion goes after him, just jumping on his back. That's the easiest way to get him, because the horse can't do anything. So, imagine you're throwing a saddle onto an animal that his natural instinct is to take off when something goes on his back. Now, you know, once they get used to the saddle and they get so-called broke, it doesn't matter. I mean, I can throw my pad on, throw my saddle on, he doesn't even care, right? He knows we're going to work, but he also knows he's confident that I am gonna take care of him, that I'm not gonna put him in a bad situation, and I have to understand that I'm not gonna put him in a bad situation. We're not gonna, it's mutual. We gotta help each other. And again, that's it's another life lesson out there for anybody. Um, and for Americans, it's I don't know where we got this idea that we got to holler and yell at each other every 5 minutes, and that somehow that's going to get you what you want. Um, the way to get us going is start pulling on the same end of the rope and stop pulling on, away from each other, because the only person that helps is the people that don't like us too much.
mm, yeah. I have to say this: your explanation about the horse being prey, it's the first time that I've heard that, and oh my god, it makes so much sense. It's like, oh, no wonder these horses buck all the time. No wonder there's a whole sport dedicated to how long can this guy stay on this horse that thinks it's going to be killed. Oh, incredible.
Well,
Uh, s-
remember, and they're trained to buck.
those ones are. Oh wow,
Oh yeah, and it's like a bull, right? When
I
you
don't
see a
remember.
bull, um, the when you see profession, PBR, bull riding. Remember that the score is there's score for the rider, and there's also a score for the bull. And if you look at some of those bulls' name, like Nitro, Dynamite, or whatever they are, and twisting and torquing their body. Anybody that can hang on for 8 seconds, and also it's not just hanging on and hanging tight. You also have to use your spurs to get the animal to do more. So,
Hmm.
it's really a lot of work, and those bucking horses, I'll take mine. He knows exactly what I want, and if I don't want him to do it, he's not going to do it. So,
Yeah, I don't know how those guys, are able to sit on those animals with balls that big to be able to just get on that animal in the first place. Oh my god.
well, I'll tell you something. There's two people in that, or two. Yeah, there's the bull, and there's you, and you better have the same size balls if you're getting on.
Yeah.
And although somebody once said that the only reason to get on a bull is to meet a nurse.
That's a great way to put it. Ladies and gentlemen, fans of the Lou Perez podcast, I have really enjoyed my conversation with Patrick Dorinson. Again, his book is available for pre-order. It's the Common Sense Cowboy's Guide to Life, stories from the old guy at the end of the bar. I hope you've enjoyed our stories from kind of the end of the bar. And if you see Patrick in a bar near you, buy him a drink.